Welcome to Hope in the Halls, Christian Voices from Washington, D.C., sponsored by Hope to the Hill, also sponsored by Can We Pray, with your hosts Nathan and Amber Kistler. Learn more about Hope to the Hill at www.hopetothehill.com.
Well, this is our first podcast in this series. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and we're finally sitting down, finding some time to do this. But before we get started, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Nathan Kistler.
I'm Amber Kistler.
And this is my beautiful wife, Amber Kistler. We've been married 4.5 years. And I often tell people it's like when you're 12 or 13 years old and you say, I'm 12 3/4. You want to keep adding on to those years. But
that's right. Maybe the longer it goes, we won't be doing that. But
maybe not.
Maybe we count it even more.
Maybe. I don't know. 4.5
and 35 days.
That's right. We'll see. But we've just had a beautiful 4.5 years. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. But God has been really good to us. But we'll kind of explain. I'm the executive director at Hope to the Hill. Amber also. We are together the executive directors.
Jointly directors.
Our first lady, if you can call it. I think we've sung in a lot of Pentecostal churches. That's what they say, right?
That's what they say.
Yeah. The first lady.
Especially in Washington. That's kind of a
known
term.
Fits.
That actually fits.
It does fit. I like that. So we have been doing this together, and maybe today, since it's the first episode of this podcast, I'll share a little bit of the history, maybe just a short portion of before we met and before we got married. We've known each other a long time. And then we'll get into the last 4.5 years and what God has been doing in Washington. But the point of this podcast is to educate people on what God is doing in D.C. and to encourage them, because we desperately want people to be encouraged about what's going on. There's a lot of sad and frustrated, angry people around the country that feel like Washington is a lost and forgotten place, and so maybe this will encourage some folks.
Yeah, and I always say the biggest question that we get is, how in the world did you get started in Washington, D.C.? Because our ministry is about ministering to the members and their staff. Sometimes it's senators, sometimes it's Supreme Court justices. When you're in the city, you never know who you're going to run into. I think that's one thing that we have found to be very clear when we are in the halls of Congress is you never know who you're going to see when you're just walking through the halls. And so people always ask, how did this get started? So I want to hear the beginning. I know the story, but I know the people that are listening don't know the story. Yeah, so when I was 18, there's a lot more before that.
Right. My dad wanted to do tent crusades in Washington and all around the country when I was a kid. And so
he did tent crusades.
Yes, he did. He did 3.
Very successful tent crusades.
Three tent crusades on them all, 2002, 2004, 2007, and some amazing experiences over those years. And what an amazing thing. But through that, we made some friendships at the Pentagon and in Washington, the Chinese consulate. There's a lot of stories we could tell maybe later about what God did through those days. But we had some great opportunity. But we did not, at that point, have really any relationships on the Hill per se, which we use that term a lot because that is Capitol Hill when we say the Hill, and that's the affectionate term that people kind of use for it, the slang term in Washington.
And it really wasn't a ministry in Washington at that point. It was just you did ministry in Washington every now and then, but it wasn't really a ministry for Washington D.C. at that point.
It was Bible distributions every new Congress, and then obviously the tent crusades that were happening back then. And so Dad had a passion for D.C., and I remember as a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid going to D.C. for the Bible distributions with these men, businessmen that Dad would pick from all over the country and walk the halls with them. And I loved not so much the environment, but I loved the people and met, even back then as a 15 to 17-year-old kid, met some members of Congress that became very, very close friends and kind of mentors to me. And so we got involved with a ministry called Faith in Action in the nation's capital. And that ministry, Reverend Rob Shank at the time, they were doing ministry to the Supreme Court specifically, not only. And we did some really cool stuff with the court back then, and that's, again, another story. But I noticed over time that there was not a ministry that was specifically dedicated to members of Congress. We find so many organizations in Washington that are policy-pushing organizations, which is great that they do that. But I had not seen many ministries or organizations that wanted to just give to members. And so when in 2016, I started singing at a theater in the boondocks of West Virginia so I could make a living to stay in DC. And I lived in an office, slept on the floor on a cot for a whole year.
Fun.
Yeah, it was great. And I had to shower down the street at a gym. And if I needed to use the bathroom, I had to leave the office that was out back and go to the main office.
I would never make it.
Yeah,
you know,
it was crazy.
I would never make it.
It was crazy.
There's no way I could have done that.
And so if I had to, some nights, wake up and go, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. But I don't want to have to get up and go all the way into the main office, but did that for a whole year. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Thursday nights I would drive to West Virginia and sing. And that's how I made a living to be in D.C. that first year being full-time in D.C. And then in 2017, we had some donors at that point, but I had, created the Hope to the Hill name and the website and all that stuff and just kind of started from scratch. And what it looked like was going into the office buildings. There's this bank of elevators. You know where it is, in the Longworth building.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. That was going to be my next question, was how, because you get this question a lot, how do you create the relationships? Because it's not just as easy as walking into the Rayburn building or Longworth, and then just walking in and finding a member and creating this relationship. That doesn't happen. And if you go with us on any trips, then you realize, it doesn't happen. You can walk into their office. You're free to do so. Yeah. But they're not always in there. In fact, they're rarely in there. They're usually voting.
Or sometimes they peel out the back door.
Yeah, because they see people coming.
Yeah, the famous line is, and I've actually seen this happen, staffers will go, oh, the member's out right now. And sometimes there have been on probably 5 or 6 occasions I've stepped out of an office and I've seen the member walking out of the private door into their office so that staff could say, oh, they're not here right now. They bolt out of the back office. And so that does happen sometimes.
I need staffers like that sometimes.
I have felt the same way sometimes. But there's this bank of elevators. Yeah, bank of elevators in the Longworth building, and there's 4 elevators there. And I would ride those elevators up and down all day. And when members would finish voting, they would all kind of pile into those elevators.
And they cram in.
They do.
They cram in.
And there's 2 elevators that are for members only. And so I would happen to get on those elevators and strike up a conversation with members.
You didn't get in trouble?
No. Well, I didn't really know that I wasn't supposed to be getting on those elevators at that point. I was a newbie. And I didn't get in trouble at least at that point. But I started, having conversations with members and trying to get them to say, hey, well, we should, connect sometime. And if they did say that, I'd walk off the elevator like I'm walking somewhere else, and I'd get in a corner and I'd get on my phone and start sending an email, find out who their scheduler was, and send an email and say, hey, I just ran into your boss on an elevator. I'd love to have a meeting with them to pray with them.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, initiating. And it took years of time before we built trust with members, even just the few members, we call them the faithful few that we've had, where they felt comfortable enough to allow me to come into their office on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis. And it's taken many, many years of time to get to that point. But God's given us favor.
It takes that long for trust.
Yes. And, the saying we've always had is the greatest gift we can give to a member of Congress is anonymity.
Right.
The greatest gift they can give to us is their trust. And so that leading up to 2017, and I know you've heard this story, so I'm not going to go into all the depths of this story.
But they haven't. So.
But it's fun. You and I reconnected in 2017. You had a movie coming out.
Right.
You invited me, or actually...
Which really, it all ties into what God is doing now.
It does.
Really, it is a crazy ride that we have been on, but it is important to tell the story and the details, because it's not just about how we met and the things that happened in between. It's also how God used those things to create things to happen now, just as of 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. And I think it was. I love telling this story. I do. But it was a really beautiful thing, because after 7 years, I think we had dated when we were 20. It's been 7 years since we had really
we met when we were 13.
We did, and then we dated when we were 20, and then 27. You were 28, I was 27.
Yeah.
And Jason called me, your stepdad, and he said, hey, out of nowhere, kind of like shocked me. He said, hey, why don't you come to Atlanta to sing at this event that we're doing? I said, well, okay. And then you reached out, I think, a day or two later and said, hey, I have a movie coming out. why don't you come a day early and we're going to do it. There was some kind of screening for the family members of the actors.
Yeah, it was in Atlanta, and
Yep.
it was a private screening. We had
Yep.
not seen the film completely edited yet, so this was our first time to see it. Which, by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, the movie was called A Question of Faith.
It's a great movie, too.
Great storyline. It was a lot of fun to be in it, but we were screening the film for the first time as the actors with just their families and the producers and things like that in Atlanta. So I had called you and invited you to come because I think you were coming anyways into town, and I just
Yeah.
said, why don't you stay over and go to the screening? And then from that stemmed your
So
idea.
You introduced me to the producer,
Right.
Angela White.
Angela White.
And you told her, oh, this is my friend Nathan. He works in
Friend
D.C.
Nathan.
Yeah.
That sounds weird right
It does now, after all these years.
My friend Nathan.
Six years. And so Angela, as soon as you said he works in D.C., she was like, oh, well, this film needs to be seen by Congress. And at that point, I was like, I mean, why not? I mean, sure. Great. I hadn't even seen the film
You'd
yet.
never done that before. Then.
No, but I haven't watched the film yet either. So I was
And
like,
truthfully, you didn't know if it could be done.
yeah. And so I gave her my card and I said, you can call me on Monday. Well, she called me first thing Monday morning and she, told me her idea. And I said, man, well, I mean, I think it's great. I said, I just have one question. Would Amber be coming by chance if that's the case? She said, well, yeah, we were going to bring all the actresses and actors that can come. And I said, well, I'm in. I'll do it. And behind the scenes, I had told you I was still madly in love with you while I was in Atlanta that weekend. So I think you were dating somebody at the time
simmer,
too. So.
It started out as a little simmer, and then it was a flame, and then it just it got there.
So we ended up that whole summer long. That was in March. That whole summer, leading up to September, when we were going to do the screening, I would make up reasons to call you and be like, "Oh, this is an update on what's going on. How are you, by the way, Amber?" And you were like, "Oh, I'm fine, great." But we got to September. We screened the film. It really was a really cool night because it was the first time anything like that had happened on the house side, and we had a great turnout. And Kim Fields was there, and so many
a lot of the actors came.
Yeah, it was a really cool night. I think one of the best parts of that evening, too, for me was watching Congressman Louis Gohmert give a tour of the Capitol to all these actors, some of them that were Democrats, and that typically would not ever want to talk to somebody like Louis Gohmert, and to see the camaraderie and how much they loved him after they spent that time. It really, I think, sparked for both of us some really interesting ideas, because at that time we weren't even dating yet.
No.
But later, looking back, it's been pretty neat. But screened the movie. A few months later, you and I started dating.
Got married in April of 2019.
Yep, and then we hit the ground running in D.C. together as a married couple. And even before we got married, it was neat to see how God, just Chaplain Black had made the Senate chaplain made some really beautiful, he said some things, about us and to us, and prayed over us before we got married. And
we still have a video of that prayer because it was so powerful.
It was. I'll never forget that as long as I live. But so now we've kind of led up over the last 4.5-5 years. We have done multiple screenings on the Hill. In 2021, we screened the Chosen Christmas special and had Jonathan Roumie. You got to walk Jesus around.
I begged Nathan for one job that week, and I wanted my job to be, I'm a huge fan of The Chosen, and I'm an even bigger fan of Jonathan Roumie, because I just feel like his depiction in that show of Jesus is just, I don't know, I just feel like that's the closest that we've ever gotten. I don't, and obviously we've never seen Jesus face to face. We weren't alive back in that time. So I can't really say, but I really do feel like just watching him depict the character of Jesus, I felt like even with his sense of humor, we know that he has a sense of humor. He created us. Yep. And his just kindness, his lovingness, even when you see him get frustrated and angry, it just shows the humanity side that Jesus had when he was walking on the earth. And so I have just been a huge fan of Jonathan Roumie. So when Nathan told me he was coming, I said, okay, I want the job of walking him in to the Capitol building. And I was so excited. When he walked through those doors, I had to stop and remind myself that this was Jonathan Roumie and not Jesus.
Yeah. I remember
because it was such a weird
You were so
feeling.
Excited.
I said, I feel like I should worship him, and I know that's not right. But it was just the strangest feeling meeting him. And I'm telling you, if you've never met Jonathan Roumie before, let me be the first to say he is the kindest human being, and so humble.
Yeah.
He was so honored to be there. And then I got to walk him through the hallways and then get him back to the room where we were doing the screening. And the coolest thing for me was watching him turn that corner, and there were all these members of Congress who were standing in a line. They were all standing in a line. Now, mind you, on our walk over there, Jonathan had been telling me how he wanted to get some pictures with members and some of the members that he greatly admired, and just wanted to have some memories to take back with him from the journey that he had. And when we turned the corner, he said, "What are they all standing in a line for?" He had no clue it was for him.
Yeah.
They were all there to take a picture with Jonathan Roumie, and they were all fans of The Chosen, which to me was even a greater feeling, knowing that our members of Congress had fallen in love with what a great show. I mean, The Chosen, such a great show. But a lot of that, what people don't know, is because The Chosen had given us DVDs to pass out during. We have an outreach quarterly that we do, and every quarter we go to every single office in the Capitol building. And how many offices are there?
535.
And so 535 offices, and usually 2 to 3 days. We last time we got it done in 2 days.
And
We're
that
getting
actually
quicker.
started. I left that out. That started with your film,
Right.
with PureFlix.
It did. It
PureFlix
started with our
donating
film.
first the films. Your film was the very first film we ever gave out.
Yeah.
And then I think we've done 11 or so projects now.
PureFlix started it. They donated our film, and then they gave out 535 copies of the DVD. And then Hope to the Hill was able to take those DVDs into the offices of the members and present them, because you can't give a gift over a certain amount of money for ethics violations. But we were able to gift them as a presentation to their libraries this film, and so that became a thing. And it didn't just stop with PureFlix. Well, then Angel Studios came along and said, "Well, we want to do that," and so they gave us The Chosen.
And that's a funny story.
That's a funny story in and of itself as well.
Do you remember? You want? I don't know. We can tell that later.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
But because I don't want to give everything away.
Okay, that's true.
So
that's another
that's another episode. You got to come back for that story. Yeah. But then, Angel gave us The Chosen DVDs, and I think we started with season 1, obviously, and those members watched it.
Yeah.
And they became huge fans of The Chosen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not giving that all in part to us, saying that was because of us that they became fans. But what God did through just these small happenings in the very beginning and how it led up to where it is now is amazing to watch, because I don't know that they would have watched The Chosen had it not been put in front of them. I don't know. I mean, if you don't know, I mean, the member's life is so busy.
Yeah.
I mean, they are constantly going. I mean, even when they're home with their family, I mean, you got to think you're really trying to just get in as much family time as you can before you have to hop on a plane and come right back.
Oh, yeah.
And Jonathan was taken back that the fact that they were in line to take a picture with him. And so it was just, it was the coolest experience. But that was The Chosen. And then the next one we did was
we did
Jesus Revolution.
Well, and we did The Chosen for 3 seasons.
Right, we gave that out 3 seasons. But that was the second screening that we did, was The Chosen.
Screening was
the Christmas special.
That's right. And it was amazing.
It was incredible.
We had like 51 members of Congress, I think, that showed up that night.
And brought their kids.
Yeah, and a lot of staffers. I was blown away just by the fact, and again, this is not a political thing. It was deemed one, I think, in a lot of ways, but at that time, Republicans didn't wear masks and Democrats did wear masks.
We were at the end of 2020 there.
20, and was it 21, right?
Was it 21?
Yeah, I think it was 21. Yeah. And they, as we were walking in the Capitol, do you remember that? Like, Democrats, we were walking to these elevator banks in the basement of the Capitol, about to take Jonathan upstairs with some members of Congress. The elevator opened, and all these members were flooding off the floor. And there was a whole elevator of Democrats, because they all had masks on. So we knew it was Democrats. And one guy on the very front line, he went, "Jesus."
I remember that.
And Jonathan just smiled, and he's like, "Well, no, I just portray Jesus.
Right.
I'm not Jesus."
He's always good to say that, too.
And I'll never forget that. It was so amazing. And there's some crazy stories from that night that we'll share maybe at another time.
Episode.
Yeah, another episode.
We have tons of stories.
Lots of stories.
You gotta subscribe.
But
we got stories for days.
Yeah, we do. We have months and months worth. And what an incredible thing, which leads us to just the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, then we did the Jesus Revolution.
We did that back in
Jesus Revolution was just last
May.
quarter. Yeah, we did that in May. And we got to meet Greg and his wife, Greg Laurie, Pastor Greg Laurie.
They were awesome.
And what incredible people they were, just to get to know them and watch their life on film. I mean, that was their story.
And then to talk to them and spend that evening.
Yeah.
We ended up that night in the Congressional Chapel, the Rotunda, and you had a viral video that Greg posted on Instagram and Twitter and all of that. And he was blown away. Now, listen, I'm Amber's biggest hype man, okay? You guys got to know that. I am always her biggest hype man. So I always nudge when I can. If we're in the Rotunda,
you do try.
I do try. And thankfully, Kathy Morse Rogers from Spokane, member from Spokane, Washington, she knows that you sing, and she's a big fan of the Gaithers. And so she said, well, Amber, of course, are you going to sing? And so Greg was blown away, he and his wife both, and posted that video. And then we ended up in the prayer chapel there.
Yeah.
And they prayed over us. And what a lot of people don't know, maybe if you're listening to this, is we've struggled with infertility over the past since we got married. We were pregnant with twins, and God has been doing. He's blessed us. We've been
immensely
very, very grateful. But Greg and his wife and the whole group of people prayed over us that night, and it was a full circle moment for me, because I listened to Greg Laurie at night at 1 a.m. every night when I was a kid on 106.9 The Light in North Carolina, and to be able to sit and talk to him and have them pray over us was a beautiful moment for me, full circle. But so we screened that movie. It was awesome.
We had a bunch of members show up to that.
We did, and
we
it was
showed
fun.
it in the Longworth cafeteria.
Whew, and that's a whole nother story.
Story.
Well, it was an interesting night, and you just never know. Washington D.C. is a fluid place. You have to be ready on it to change on a dime.
I always agree with that. I always have to say, in Washington, we always have to have a plan B and a C.
Yes.
Because it always changes, and we can never just go off of plan A, which would be the perfect plan, right?
Yeah.
That we always have started with.
But it always ends up better than what we could have.
It always ends up better,
imagined.
and it's. I think maybe we just have to work on realizing that it's all about what God's plan is, not our plans. Yeah. Even though we can have a plan, it's okay to organize and get it ready. We have to learn. We've really had to learn to go with the flow and say, there's a reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason why.
You're a planner too, so
I am an organized freak.
Yes.
I love planning. I love being organized. And when things don't go to plan, it drives me crazy. And the Lord knows that about me, and I think He does it on purpose half the time.
Well, and that's okay, because it's just a wonderful growing experience for both of us.
It teaches you to have a lot of faith and trust.
Yes.
In God's plan, His perfect plan, and the process. And then when it comes out and it's even better than you could have ever planned for, it helps for the next time.
Well, I know we were both exhausted that night of the Jesus Revolution screening, so we're sitting at a table falling asleep, because we had seen the movie quite a few times at that point. Yeah. And I remember looking back, and there were these 3 female members of Congress with popcorn sitting behind us, and they were loving life. It was, and that's what it was about. Like, for us to be able to bring, especially for members that are Christians that know the Lord already, and all 3 of these ladies do, to bring something that's encouraging into their life when they have such a stressful job every single day and there's so much going on. To see them, as we looked back, see them smiling and giggling like they're at a movie theater was really special I think for both of us. And it was just an amazing time. Now that led into about a month ago.
Yeah, each one was a step, I feel like. We stepped and stepped and stepped, and God was like, nope, more. Yep. We've got more. We've got more. And we're still doing that.
Couldn't have ever imagined when The Sound of Freedom was coming out. We were in NRB. Remember, it was everywhere. They had the posters for Sound of Freedom.
I remember coming down the escalator of NRB, and we were in Orlando, and we went over there. And I remember coming down the escalator, and there was this giant poster of Jim Caviezel, and they had it on every one of those massive windows, and it said "Sound of Freedom, Sound of Freedom, Sound of Freedom." And I was just like, man, that looks kind of intense.
We were going to try to watch it that day.
Yeah, but we had to go.
Yeah, we had to go to that PureFlix event, and then we had to leave.
Yeah,
so we didn't get
but
to
I
watch
remember seeing it and thinking, I really want to see that film. And then they sent you a link for us to watch at our house. And I think after Nathan and I watched that film for the first time, sitting in our living room, we both looked at each other, we had tears in our eyes, and we didn't say a word for like 5 minutes. Yeah. And I always tell people, I wouldn't say, yeah, it's a great movie, because it even though it is, it's more of I would describe it as a powerful movie. Yeah. And by the way, if you've not seen it, we encourage everyone to go watch The Sound of Freedom. Yep. Right now, it's done close to 160 million.
Oh, 172 million.
172 million nationwide. It hasn't even gone worldwide yet.
Yep.
And so it's done amazing. It's the Lord has really used this film in so many ways,
yes,
as it should.
Yeah.
And so we watched that film, and I think we had the same question that everyone does at the end of watching that film.
Yeah.
What can we do
Yep.
to help?
Yep.
How can we help stop child trafficking, human trafficking?
Yeah.
But especially child trafficking, those that are completely innocent.
Yeah.
And then that began another journey.
Yeah, I think it was probably 2 weeks later. I got a call from our buddy Matt Faraci and the guys from Angel Studios. And again, another story for another time we'll tell, but got the call and said, hey, we want to bring Jim Caviezel, Tim Ballard, and Eduardo Verástegui to D.C.
Who's the executive producer?
Yes, and he's...
Which, by the way, Sound of Freedom wouldn't be here if it weren't for Eduardo.
Amazing guy. Love
he
Eduardo.
fought for this film for 5 years.
He did. And long before that, just to make the movie, let alone get it back from Disney and to get it out there for people to see it.
And there wouldn't be a story if it weren't for Tim Ballard, because he's the real life hero.
And Jim being willing to play the character.
Jim, who's an amazing actor.
Oh my gosh.
I mean.
Yeah. And a sweet guy.
Lives what he believes.
Yeah, definitely. And excuse me. And so it was just an amazing time, when they came to DC. And when I met Jim for the first time, he's very intense. His personality is very intense, but he was super, super kind. And Matthew had told him that afternoon that we had dealt with infertility, and I did not know at the time that Jim and his wife had adopted kids that all had some form of defect or disease, that whatever you want to call that. They had specifically adopted kids that had special needs in that way.
Yeah.
And so when Matthew had told him that we had gone through that, losing our twins and that we were going through IVF, I'll never forget that he looked, and he's tall, and he looked down at me, and he had tears welling up in his eyes. He said, "I'm so sorry. I'll certainly be praying for you." And right after that, we walked into Kathy McMorris Rogers' office, and she has a son with Down syndrome. His name is Cole. What a sweet.
We love Cole.
We love Cole. And Cole happened to be on the hill that day. And so Kathy brought him in. She said, "This is the guy that played Jesus." And he went, "Huh?" And Jim smiled. And everybody left the room, and Jim stayed back. And I looked back, and Jim grabbed his head and kissed him on the forehead. And it was one of the most beautiful moments, because Jim also played Jesus. Yeah. And so when I look at him, I also go, it's a representation.
We know all three Jesuses now.
Yeah, we do. It was the most beautiful moment, really, I think, that I've ever seen. I mean, to see the compassion that he had when nobody was looking for a child, a boy, and especially someone that has Down syndrome. Jim truly cares about that, and it's been a joy and honor to get to know him and to call him a friend. And so we introduced him to Speaker McCarthy that day.
Which, that meeting, miracle. When
a year ago we took Kirk Cameron in to meet with Speaker. He wasn't the Speaker yet. He was minority leader, and I always try to reach out through Congressman Loudermilk. We always try to throw stuff to the Speaker. He likes to meet interesting people. And so when I said, you guys want to meet Jesus? They said, yes, please. So we got the meeting, went in, we showed him the trailer for The Sound of Freedom. And Jim said, well, Mr. Speaker, we think you should show this film to Congress. And he said, okay. And we were like, oh. And even then I was like, he's being nice. He may or may not do this. Well, his staff was on it.
He's a man of his word.
His staff was on it. And between his deputy chief, Congressman Loudermilk, and I, we went to work on this. And two Tuesdays ago, we screened Sound of Freedom for Congress, and every member was invited.
History was made.
Nothing like this has been done, and definitely was history being made. And it's not anything that we've done, but God opened up the door and has given us favor to be able to just be a very small part in this stuff. And I got to tell you, Amber knows, we finally sat down. There were so many things that went wrong that day that nobody will ever know about.
We will never tell.
And Eduardo, I remember after the event was over, my dad and mom were with us, and George and Linda, some of our ministry team. And my dad said, "Man, what a stressful day it's been." And Eduardo looked at me and he said...
Because Eduardo knew.
Yep. And he said... What did he...
He said, "Nobody knows but me and you."
We've laughed about that a lot. But it was true. I mean, I tell you, the most spiritual the most spiritual warfare I think I've ever experienced. Just like internally,
there was a tornado forming
over the Capitol.
There's a picture. You can look this up. There was a tornado forming over the Capitol
while
dome.
we're in the Capitol.
While we're there, right before the screening is about to start.
Yep.
I mean, you cannot tell me that the evil one was not trying to fight against this, because the film is so powerful.
Yep.
He doesn't want people to see this. He doesn't want the eyes to be opened.
Yep.
And I think the coolest moment of the night for me was at the very end of the film, because here's the thing. You have Jim Caviezel, who is this absolutely huge superstar. I mean, you're talking about Count of Monte Cristo, Passion of the Christ, and now Sound of Freedom. He's one of the most talked about actors that are in the world right now. And so everywhere he goes, obviously he gets attention, and he's getting attention for Sound of Freedom. And then you've got this guy, Tim Ballard, right, who is the hero.
Yeah.
He's the guy. And honestly, Jim always puts the attention on Tim. He tries to, but it's hard because people want to meet Jim.
Yeah.
Because he's such a huge superstar. And it's not just about that film, it's about the past. It's about they want to get in line and see, for all the stuff that they've watched in the past.
Edmond Dantes.
Yes. And so he always tries to put the attention on Tim, because he says, this is the only reason I did this, was because
he's the real hero.
He's the real hero. I wanted to portray what he has done.
Yeah.
And Tim is he's very quiet in a sense.
Yeah.
He takes everything in the room, and I think a lot of that is because I don't even want to know what the man has seen through all his years of what he's had to do and deal with. And he never wants the attention. He really just wants to get the word out about spreading awareness and getting help.
Yeah.
And so that's what Tim's mission is in this whole thing. And so at the end of the screening, all the members stood up and applauded, and they turned towards Tim, and they just started applauding him.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what a full circle moment that had to be for him.
Oh, totally.
I mean, here's this guy who has put his life on the line. He has left his family, not knowing if he was going to come back and see them.
Yeah.
And not just with that story in Sound of Freedom, but many more
12
stories.
years of that. Yeah.
I mean, and it's all about rescuing kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hero. That's the kind of people that we want our kids to look at and say, now that's a hero. And I remember that night we were standing in line. We had a line of members who wanted to get their pictures made with Tim and Jim and Eduardo. And so we had Tim and Eduardo up there in front of the banner. And Congressman Brian Mast was in line, which
double amputee.
He's double amputee. I mean, he's a hero in and of itself as well. But he had his kids up there with him.
His two, yep.
And they were about to close the line, and I said, no, get in line. And so he was very thankful for that.
Yeah.
And it was funny, he and I had this exchange together. That was the first time I'd ever really met him. And so I took their picture. He gave me his phone, and he made this joke about, I'll name a room after you because of doing this and stuff. And so I remember he got up there with Tim, and he looked at both of his sons, and he said, I want you to know what a real hero looks like.
Yes.
And that was his whole purpose of getting a picture with Tim, was that his sons could meet Tim Ballard. And I just thought, wow, that to me was just one of the other coolest moments of the night, was to see these members who are raising their kids the right way. And
show what a real hero is.
Yeah, to show what heroism really looks like. And there's this guy, Tim Ballard, who he has put his life on the line for millions of children and has rescued thousands of them, and is still doing so. And his team is amazing. We've gotten to know them. Yeah. We know that they're the real deal. I can't imagine what they see on a weekly basis.
A lot of the guys that work for him can't even watch the film. They can't. It reminds us of the things we see all the time, and have to kind of walk through. You got to think, these guys are going in as buyers. They have to play the part. Yeah,
they have to play the role.
As sex tourists.
Yeah, they're pedophiles.
Yeah, they are playing pedophiles, and so the things that they have to see and do.
But that's what you have to do in order to really save the children. That's the only way that they have found that works. That they can do that, efficiently, where they can get the children and put them in safety.
Yeah.
And and we asked, like, what can we do to help? This was our way of feeling like we could do something to help, because these are the lawmakers.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about one of the greatest opportunities to put this film in front of the people that can really bring effective change on the issue. And even now, since that screening, having state House and Senate members of like Tennessee, Texas, that have reached out wanting to show it to their collective, bodies, so they can try to do something more. And so, I mean, it's become a movement, and God has been so gracious. We've been able just to be a little part in that whole thing. And I remember when we finally sat down and they started the evening.
Day. It was a long week.
When Jim, Tim, and the speakers sat down on the stage, I started crying, and Congressman Loudermilk was sitting between us, and he looked at me, he goes, "Why are you crying?" I said, "I don't even know. It's been a long day." he said, "I know," and it was, and everything that we did, everything that happened was, I have to thank Speaker McCarthy, Congressman Barry Loudermilk, Tim, Jim, Eduardo for being willing, Angel Studios for being willing to bring them, to get them there. There were so many people, our entire team, that worked so selflessly to put up backdrops. You were building a backdrop while I was putting out fires that day, not literal fires.
18 feet long.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it was just, I mean, what God has done through that. 3 bills that have been brought before the Congress within the last 2 weeks now.
And that's
on that
the most
issue.
important thing, is that the laws are getting changed. They're going to vote on these bills. They're voting to go rescue the 85,000 children right now, I believe, in the next week I was reading about.
Yep.
And, I mean, that's why we did it. That's really...
Well, and the most important thing, and people ask this question, I've had people ask, what does a secular, because the movie's really not a Christian film per se.
It's
There's
not
some
what
references.
people call a faith-based film.
It is a movie that reflects light, I think, and is trying to shine light on the darkness. But I've had people ask, why would y'all get involved with something like that? How can you share the gospel through that? And my answer has been, our role in Washington has always been to be creative in the ways that we find ways to share the gospel with people. So that whole event allows more members to know that there's a Christian ministry on Capitol Hill that is there to serve them, to pray with them, to share Jesus with them. And it's a stepping stone to having that opportunity to share Jesus with them. And so relational gospel, as we've often put it, building relationships, walking through life with these folks, loving on them in hopes of sharing the gospel with them, because they're the most powerful people on the planet, and they're the most distrusting people on the planet. And so we have done our very best to try to share the gospel in that way with these folks, and it has been a great joy. And the greatest joy is getting to do it with you. And we have more stories that we're going to share in the coming weeks and months on this podcast. But
and just to echo what you said, we get a lot of questions about, are we kind of not lobbyists in what we do, because we are Christians and we run a Christian ministry. And so obviously everyone that we meet is not going to be a Christian that's a member of Congress or a staffer. And this is always my answer. We don't ever go in there pushing an agenda on anybody. We don't take on any political issues a lot. There are some that we will stand our ground on. Sure. But pretty much we are non-biased.
Yeah.
I mean,
nonpartisan that we deal with,
And we don't ever want to stray away from that, because I believe that if we can reach a person, and members of Congress are all people, they're all humans, just like we are. Yep. If we can reach a person with the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel changes them. I don't have to go in there with a policy and saying this is against God's law. Yep. Because here's the thing, if they don't believe in God, they don't care that it's against his law. Yeah. And so for me, my job as a Christian in this ministry is to go in there and just love on them and be the light of Christ in such a dark area. Yep. And if we can do that, and somehow it works, and the Holy Spirit reaches their soul, which I believe can, and it changes them. Yep. The gospel changes them, and I don't have to do that for them. Yep. And then if, then you're talking about something different. Then you're talking about, maybe helping them mature in their spirituality. That's later on. Yep. But for where we are right now with these people who aren't believers, we don't go in there pushing policy and biblical agendas. Them over the head with the Bible right in front. Because my whole thing has always been, and you and I have pushed really hard on this over the last few years. When we tried to legislate righteousness for so long in America, and there's nothing wrong with trying to legislate righteousness. That's a good thing. Absolutely. But that in and of itself, without revival, without a heart change,
the saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. We don't want just an outward expression or an outward change. We want change that comes from the heart. And so it's a both and scenario. And so instead of trying to just beat people over the head with the Bible, we want to share Jesus with them and walk through life and do both at the same time.
Absolutely.
And so God has been really gracious to us to be able to do that. But we can't wait to share more with you guys on the next one.
So much more.
And we hope you can go to hopetothehill.com to find more information out about our ministry, about trips we have to DC, a lot of different things. But until next time, we will see you soon. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Amber.